And as you know, for those of you who follow us by way of our advertisements of our guests to come on the show this morning, we are happy that Bright Simmons and Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh have been generous enough to agree to join us today to continue with the discussion we had last week. Bright Simmons is board member, Africa Population and Health Research Center. Of course, you know him to be with Imani as well. Good morning and welcome to NewsFile, Bright.
Thank you.
Joining us on for a virtual interaction is Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, Executive Director of the CDD Ghana. Thank you very much, Prof, for joining us.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Great, and I'm excited. The sound quality on your Zoom this morning is great. Also joining us is Professor Abraham Kwabena Annan, who is Director NMIMR. But we will first deal with the question of the 4.5 million bribery scandal that has forced the Tema oil refinery boss to exit. We asking, will the state follow the money? Literally, will the state do anything beyond accepting a resignation? We will have a second segment, and then we will deal extensively with the matters arising with the lockdown being lifted and the questions of mistrust in the data that is being churned out as far as the coronavirus is concerned. All right. So, like I said, Professor Abraham Kwabena Annan is director at Noguchi, and so he will join us and help us understand matters better. Right. Now, let's get to ask Bright Simmons. Now, I have spent quite some time reading the over 30 pages of the court documents that give such graphic detail that suggests to you that there is some unimpeachable evidence about this bribery scandal. It speaks about email, correspondences that it obviously has intercepted. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission has intercepted, and details by dates, by hours and minutes, what happened from the start 2015 to even sometime in 2017. And the question being asked now is, the chief executive of the Tema oil refinery tendered his resignation. Mr. Beko, Asante Beko, tendered his resignation. The president said, I have accepted your resignation. So questions are being asked, is that the end of the story? But what does your reading of the court documents tell you about what went on when we were in an emergency situation and we needed power plants?
No, you're absolutely right, Samson. It reads like a Jeffrey Archer novel. That's completely fascinating. So sometime around 2012, Goldman Sachs, which is a massive investment bank, I think $1 trillion in assets, very powerful organization, bought shares in a company called AKSA Energy, and therefore became, I think it was a minority holding of around 16%, if my memory serves me right. And therefore they became very involved in trying to find business for their portfolio company.
Right.
Around 2013, the power crisis in Ghana started to deepen, and by 2014, a strategy had been adopted by the government of the day to implement what then became known as the emergency power policy. And the idea was that we're going to look for fast-track energy projects, and that would typically mean modular energy plants. So this would be energy plants that are effective in responding to emergency needs for power. So you could literally bring them a power plant in a box, they are often called, install them quickly, and then be able to provide power. So Goldman got wind of this, and this being Ghana, they started to look for a Ghana specialist in their team. The person who came up was Mr. Berko, who was then practicing in London as an investment banker for Goldman. And London is one of the major centers of Goldman activity worldwide. I think 20% or more of global revenue derives from London, if not more. So they approached Mr. Berko, or rather they instructed Mr. Berko, given that he was the employee, and then said to him that he should make efforts to get AKSA into Ghana, because they had already discussed it with AKSA, and AKSA was very keen on deploying their power plants in Ghana. At that time, margins in Turkey were under huge pressure, and so AKSA was looking for any opportunity to increase their margins. Mr. Berko then, according to the allegations, and as you've rightly pointed out, those allegations are very strongly backed by evidence. And the reason is that Mr. Berko, for some fascinating reason, together with other principals in this affair, decided to commit almost everything that they were doing to writing. And I think the view that he had was that so long as he used his personal email address, it would be impervious to audit.
Right.
So he kept saying that, only my Gmail, forgetting that, Gmail is owned by an American company, and by, since the Patriot Act days, all of this information is generally transparent.
But what he did then, according to the court documents, was a violation of his own company's regulations.
Which is why he did not want to use his official email address.
Because if he had used his official email address, it will be audited from time to
Periodic
time.
audit, indeed.
Right. Okay.
Indeed. So when the decision was made then to enter Ghana in 2015, Mr. Berko decided to use a consulting company. And one of the fascinating things about this this affair, is how, till date, investigative journalists in this country have not been able to unearth this consulting company. A lot of us have ideas of which company it might be, but we will keep it under wraps now for obvious legal reasons. So this consulting company had links to the government at the highest levels due to the presence, either on their board or their ownership, of what they describe as a politically exposed person.
Right.
So this person was a brother of a very senior government official. And Mr. Berko decided to engage this company with AKSA, obviously to his advice, because AKSA will be relying on his country knowledge. And this entity was then responsible for fast-tracking and enabling the acquisition of the right agreements, the right licenses, etc.
Right.
Remember though that this was an emergency power situation, so a lot of the rules have been relaxed. A lot of the Energy Commission type rules and the likes have been compressed into single panel evaluations where multiple regulators sit around the table.
For good reason.
For good reason.
Right.
The challenge though, as you might wonder, is if the country itself had a policy to fast track, then why will you need another intermediary to fast track?
Okay.
That's a very important question. We'll go back to it.
So the consulting company you talk about is the entity that the court documents refer to as the intermediary.
Indeed.
And that also, and that also is against the company's policies to have, for Berko, who is alleged to have used that entity, particularly to channel bribes.
No, he should have disclosed it.
Right.
The challenge is not that this was against Goldman's policy to use consultants, but you need to disclose that. And unfortunately, he did not disclose the nature of the transactions that these people were involved with. And in repeated disclosures to the company authority, the company head, the company compliance department, he kept ignoring or neglecting to do so. So this intermediary company then set up...
So the legal department flagged it and requested that it be investigated.
Indeed.
And then they got to know that, in fact, something like that had happened.
Indeed.
Right.
So this is around February. The intermediary company then sets up an SPV as part of the process of being able to receive money and deploy it with very minimal financial authorities oversight. So financial oversight in this country will struggle if you're using an SPV to wire money in. Not that it's completely opaque, but it makes it much more difficult.
Right.
Now, we know that sometime around May, things had come to a head in that, through a lot of effort, they managed to get the government to sign an emergency power agreement, a EPA. The bribes now start to flow. And there are a lot of, smaller type bribes flying around, purportedly to the parliament, to officials in government, to the civil servants, etc.
Right.
But the most interesting was $3 million paid in the month of May.
Civil servants at the power ministry, at the electricity company.
The regulators,
right.
Exactly. Then the utilities themselves.
Yes.
So essentially the people that are going to be buying the power themselves were being bribed to look the other way rather than to perform due diligence to make sure that whether it's UCG or Greek or whatever, it's not being shortchanged.
Right.
Then the money, so about $3 million then changed hands in 2 installments in May, because in May the power agreement was signed. And the government officials then committed to get this agreement before Parliament to get ratification. And the way that the arrangement with the intermediary company had been set out was that we pay you on milestone basis.
Correct.
So when you do this for us, we pay you. And there were about 4 critical milestones. Sign the agreement, send it to Parliament, issue a letter of credit, and issue a tax waiver for the equipment that we're going to bring in.
Right.
So these 4 elements were the key milestones upon which monies were to be released.
At each point where a milestone, had been achieved, money was paid. Right.
Mr. Berkon argues that that money was being paid for activities relevant to licensing and things like that because AKSA did not have full financial infrastructure in Ghana. So this intermediary was responsible for more or less acting as their local agent and therefore making payments for all these kind of regulatory costs and the rest of it. The problem is that in the emergency power arrangements that were in place then, regulatory fees were very low for obvious reasons.
Right.
So it's very difficult to justify $3 million for regulatory activities. Land was being provided, by the government, and often it was even issued around title and things like that. We're already taken care of by. Remember the famous Ameri situation?
Right.
Government provided the land, then got a contractor to prepare the land, etc. So that claim is very difficult to sustain.
And that was corroborated by the CEO of the energy company, the Turkish energy company, that they had paid them in about 200 to 3 million, 200 to 300,000 US dollars for the regulatory compliance matters that they had done for them, and that they were not actually interested in using them, and they were ready to just give them a walkaway payment
that came
of
later.
about another $300,000.
That came much later. But in this period of May, the agreement had been signed. Parliament had to approve it, and to do that, about $3 million was required to facilitate that movement. Because remember, you had a politically exposed person between this intermediary and the government official.
Right.
And very often they will say that, we want to kick out the government official because it was being slow, and can you find somebody else? So the typical thing. And then the Ministry of Power then presented a memorandum to Parliament laying out the terms of the deal and why it was useful for Ghana at that point to ratify the deal. The problem obviously is that a lot of that information was not candid. And it's quite evident that if the Ministry of Power and other regulators were not being blinded by ulterior motives and other considerations, that should not have happened, because they went there, and one of the most egregious things they did was to design a capital recovery charge that pretends as if the power plants were going to be built anew or they were going to be purchased anew. So when you look at the tariff dedicated to capital recovery, typically you do an internal rate of return analysis or a return on investment analysis and use that to determine what the tariff for capital recovery will be. In this case, these were second-hand plants that a company was going to amass and bring in. So a proper analysis will have depressed the capital recovery and saved Ghana money.
Right.
They refused to disclose that fact. They then made additional failures. There were then additional failures to disclose around the fact that this was an HFO plant, and if you do the full analysis properly, the analysis that they had made regarding the comparative cost between the comparison of the cost between this particular plant and other plants that were also in the emergency category were all flawed, in the sense that they were not fully disclosing the facts.
Right.
Then you find out that they also, because the way that the energy demand, given the way that fuel cost pass through and the rest works, if you work it out clearly, it's not only the capacity charge you need to look at. You need to do an analysis of the energy charge to see if, given the way that the thing has been set up, the risk that the government is absorbing through letter of credit and all of those things, that would be the reasonable charge. That information was hidden from Parliament. Nobody in Parliament decided to delve into it, given the circumstances of the case. And it's very similar to the Mary problems that, you remember our organization was very much at the forefront. So once again, we come to this issue where data is usually manipulated to serve a political end. Very often with the connivance of all levels of government, Parliament, the civil service, etc., etc., etc. Long story short, AKSA, because of these failures to disclose, manages to cheat Ghana a huge amount of money, out of a huge amount of money, so that it was willing, based on the negotiations, given the documents that we have now, to pay the intermediary at that point, at this early stage of the game. We were willing to pay the intermediary $42 million. You get me? They were willing to, and Goldman Sachs was expecting to earn $10 million.
Yes, 10 million.
And there were additional disbursements, this to facilitate other people. That was costing that must have cost at least $5 million. And there was a fee for Mr. Beckon, which later on we will discover was about $2 million.
Right.
So in total, AKSA was willing to spend $60 million on everything apart from building the power plant, because it was managed to get our officials to allow them to overcharge in the simplest terms possible. So the way that they designed the tariffs, by refusing to disclose information, they had inflated the tariff, which then enabled the power company to pay these bribes, because they are profitable, profit-making company, right? So the only way they're going to pay $60 million in various, whatever you call them, bribes, facilitation fees, whatever, is if whatever profit they were going to make is substantially more than $60 million. And so when you think about it, you realize three things. One is that due to these tendencies for private interest to supersede public interest, we end up overpaying in a lot of instances, in a lot of projects in these countries, and therefore it is warranted that the citizenry and the citizens of Ghana continue to distrust public motive. You understand me? Because we've seen from event to event, whether it's Woyomi, whether it's this AKSA matter, that when it comes to their private interests, public actors, whether it's in civil servants, government officials, whatever, will place their private interests above public interest. So we have to be very careful the things they tell us. So if the Ministry of Power will go to Parliament and present information that hides the full picture in order to create a much more profitable transaction for a private company from Turkey, then it's not so surprising then that when information is put out in the public domain by officials of government, we tend to be so suspicious. Then in July, Parliament ratifies this.
Okay, now just hold on. In July, Parliament ratifying that, and the people who are asking questions why we were not wearing the mask, particularly when I started by promoting the mask wearing. That is the reason when the president announced that the medical group will release guidelines on how to use the mask and when and where to use it. It is important that we have that, because many people do not have knowledge about when it is necessary to use the mask.
And now we are observing the 1 meter distance.
More than 1 meter. We have been told by professionals, health professionals, that for as long as we are doing a two-way, like I'm doing with Bright here, under this long stretch of a desk, we don't need a mask. So that's the reason we are not wearing a mask here. Right. Now, as you speak about the lack of disclosures, and we'll get to Professor Prempeh to look at, he has a peculiar area of interest when it comes to these matters.
He always does.
And his very good friend, Professor Kwasari, has also been speaking about the fact that the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission has provided us a mounting of clues for law enforcement to quickly, indict several highly placed people for receiving bribes in the AKSA Energy deal, and yet we don't seem to be doing anything.
And it goes without saying that Professor Prempeh's publications on governance and the rest goes back many years.
That's correct.
He's given us a consistent overview of these matters.
That's correct. Now, they discover also that beyond the lack of disclosure, between Asante Beko and the CEO of the Turkish company, when they ask the CEO, they make enquiries or they interrogate him on issues, he would do a draft for him Asante Beko, and Asante Beko will vet and revise, and you see the transformation between what he wants to communicate and what eventually Asante Beko does for him to communicate to the
And
people.
that is a very important point, because as we progress, you see how that then unfolded.
Right.
So in July, Parliament approves this or ratifies this. The issue around the letter of credit and the tax waiver becomes subject to a whole range of problems. Remember, in the memorandum to Parliament, the Minister of Power assured the parliamentarians that per the agreement, if within 30 days the conditions present had not been met, they automatically waived. So that meant, therefore, that government was effectively relieved from its duties, or sorry, its obligation to provide these other items that the company, the energy company, wanted. Government was effectively relieved. And I think there were people that were saying that, look, it was quite clear to everybody that we wanted this as emergency power. If they cannot deliver in a few months as we had planned, then what's the point? And so if they're going to wait till everything else is sorted before they start acting, then they're not serious. But this started to create friction between the intermediaries and AKSA. Eventually, it gets to the point where it is quite clear that Mr. Beko is acting not in the interest of Goldman. So there's a huge principal agent problem here.
Right.
Whereas an agent of Goldman, his loyalties appear to lie with AKSA, which you've pointed out.
Right.
And then it gets to the head because it becomes quite clear that after the ratification of Parliament, the intermediaries might not be able to deliver.
Right.
So sometime around August of 2015, friction begins to develop between the what do you call it, the power company, AKSA, and the consulting company in Ghana. And eventually decide to wrap things up by giving them, I think, $1 million and walk away. Now, Mr. Beko now starts to have issues with Goldman. I think there were now some whistleblowing activities going on and the rest of it. So Goldman starts to ask questions. He starts to enter into a very elaborate scheme not to be candid. And eventually,
not to be candid at two levels.
Yes.
At the level of the intermediary, as in Goldman, and also the holding company that the company had set up. So there were two, the holding company with a committee that he was supposed to
That is Goldman's holding company in New York.
Exactly.
And then he works in Goldman London. But the way
as a subsidiary.
The way that the system works is that they have integrated teams across subsidiaries and in head office.
That's right.
And this was the nature of the arrangement.
Right. And so he evades all the two.
Yep.
And I say he evades on the basis of the evidence
that
or the allegations contained in the suit by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission.
Which is an important point which we will come to. It's a civil suit, not a criminal. It's not criminal proceedings. So what happens then is that in March, Goldman launches official investigations, and AKSA starts to collaborate gradually, start to provide some information. In May, AKSA, despite the fact that Goldman has some voting rights on AKSA's board, refuses to engage further on the matter. So in May, we're not going to cooperate anymore. In August, Goldman is like, we're out. We can't do this anymore.
Right.
In September, Mr. Beko continues to provide services to AKSA in his own private capacity, even while employed by Goldman.
And eventually resigns.
Eventually resigns in December of 2016. And by February of 2017, he had secured the all-powerful letter of credit and tax waivers. Why did AKSA need this? To make the transaction effectively risk-free. It's like, I'm not going to risk a dime here. I need a letter of credit for $100 million. I'm bringing you second-hand power plants, but I still need $100 million in a letter of credit. On top of that, I don't want to pay a single dime of tax. So I have zero risk.
Okay.
But I'm willing to pay money to get this zero risk, not to Ghana, somebody else. In February 2017, Mr. Beko had achieved these milestones, these other milestones for them, and he gets his $2 million. Which brings three issues. In fact, I'm still continuing for the first three issues because I just pointed out two.
Right.
The third issue there was that given the fact that you had a situation where the power plant was not likely to be delivered on time, the nature of this emergency power appears purely to have been a ruse to exploit to make money. Essentially, you say it's emergency power, so remove all the hurdles and all the procurement rules and the rest of it. But it doesn't come in 3 months. It doesn't come by the end of 2015. In fact, it doesn't start operating till sometime in 2018, though they start making some light test runs and the rest in 2017. It's in 2018 that full operation starts, and it's that time that they get a tax waiver. But the commitments to the letter of credit and the tax waiver have been secured by February of 2017, in that the new government had committed to do that, and therefore Mr. Beko gets his $2 million. Now, what is problematic is that when Goldman saw that, they then alerted the SEC. It's possible that they were other whistleblowers, but all the evidence, and including what has been disclosed, suggests that Goldman then actively cooperated with the SEC, because this was an employee who was breaching every etiquette in the principal agent arrangement. It's a norm. And this is when the SEC started to investigate in March 2017. They reached out to Mr. Beckon, he gave a statement, and then they went away and spent a lot of time reconstructing this whole episode. And by the time they were through, it was quite evident that the evidence for bribery was compelling. They decided then to go to the Eastern District, the courts, the U.S. court in the Eastern District in New York, and file a civil suit and disgorge Mr. Beckon of all the money that he's made.
Right. That's the primary relief they are asking from the courts.
And then any other ancillary reliefs.
Okay. So you hold on briefly for me. We'll return to you because we basically have presented the entire picture as far as the story is concerned. I'll return to you to emphasize why Ghana should be interested in pursuing this matter, and if there are any lessons to guide us in similar dealings in times like this. Right. Let me go to Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, and thank you once again for your patience. And I needed Bright to help me to take all of us through the details as much as we could to assist our viewers and listeners across the globe to appreciate this. Now, I'd like to know what your first impressions are after reading the 37-page, document put in the court. But in addition to that, this is what Professor Kweku Asare says, that the U.S. SEC has provided a mounting of clues for law enforcement to quickly indict several highly placed people for receiving bribes in the AKSA Energy deal. Further, the clues should be enough to not only cancel the $27 million tax waiver recently granted to AKSA, but to revoke its registration document. Not surprisingly, this matter seems to be of no interest to law enforcement, Parliament, or even the media. Let's hear you, Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh.
Well, I think, as you rightly said, Bright has, in this characteristically detailed manner, walked us through the structure of the transaction, both from a technical and a business angle. I would like to look at this from my wearing my CDD governance hat, from a governance perspective.
Correct.
Right. That so when you put it in this larger context, it is clear that our international reputation for the integrity of the international contracts that we enter into it's been at stake for some time. We remember that we have had problems with judgment debts going way back, and it has not even stopped. Only yesterday, I happened to see a new arbitration, a new intent notice to take us to international arbitration by one of the companies, foreign companies in this country. We went through a process of trying to clean up that problem, that mess of international arbitration, judgment debts, and the like. All of them are rising out of our international contracting relationships. I do not know what came out of that effort in the past. And now with Airbus and this one, we are now also added a reputation for corruption to our already sullen, in my view, sullen reputation for not basically keeping our word when it comes to international contracting. So the country's reputation actually, and for that matter, the brand, is at stake. And we ought to take this very seriously, because we cannot, on the one hand, go around the world drumming for business and for investment and yet be seen as a country where either we do not honor our word when it comes to contracting, or that in order to do business here, you have to basically go through this kind of arrangement with intermediaries dealing with politically exposed persons and passing out bribes and the like. I think what this speaks to is that the framework, the regime that we have set up internally as a country in doing international contracting is broken. It's clearly broken. If you look at the 4 milestone areas, I mean, the 4 points where monies tend to pass, like that Bright laid out. You know, these processes are usually in our system led by political actors. Of course, with some of their, own, favorite bureaucrats or civil servants in tow, but these are led by political actors going out to make the deal, sometimes even bringing in the third party. Political actor has something to do with that. When the deal comes, going to negotiate the contract itself. Oftentimes, political actors lead these things. Then, after that has been done, the approval of the transaction, of course, by Parliament, is obviously a political forum. And then, of course, tax waivers, same process, right? So we have actually turned the entire contracting process from the front end to the back end, over to political actors to lead, which exposes them, of course, to these kinds of corrupting influences. And it's clear that the intention, the original idea that parliamentary oversight would somehow discipline our international contracting process and inject some integrity into it is completely lost. That idea of the framers of the Constitution definitely has not come to pass. So there's a problem there. And so I think that for me, the real reason we need to take this not as an isolated case, it is not. It is not. The Airbus case is not. Basically, there is a systemic failure here. There is a problem with the way we are set up as a country to do business with the outside world, with too little independent review. I remember that for many years now, Dr. S.K.B. Asante, who is an international lawyer of repute, has served on exit arbitration panels, has done a lot of work at the UN level on transnational investments and the like, has been advocating an independent review process, right? An independent review process that where you have, some, experts or, contracting experts like to review some of the agreements that we make and at least render an opinion on it for the benefit of the political actors before they make decisions on these things. And it is clear to me that we really need to step back and look at this process we've given ourselves. It's not working. It's exposing the whole process to huge corruption risk and rigging. And it is costing the country inordinate amounts of money that we do not have to waste. It's not going to be solved by just moving people around, because I've said it's clearly a systemic failure here. It's not going to be solved by just changing one government, bringing that government, doing that and that. Clearly, we need to step back and look at it again and realize that it's not working. We all know, sometimes we pretend we don't know these things. We all know these things, right? That the processes that one has to go through to get these things passed. The executive goes to sign a deal, right? Sometimes they even conclude the deal. Basically, it's essentially sent to Parliament as a fait accompli. And that pressure then passed, because if you have already concluded the deal, essentially, and you are sending it for ratification, it's not supposed to be for ratification, right? You're actually supposed to, why don't we have a process where you don't conclude the deal? What Parliament does is not ratify. It actually is the one that gives the green light for you to proceed to complete the transaction, right? It's not ratification. Ratification means that it's a done deal and we are coming to give you retrospectively the appropriate authority that you did not have previously go into the deal. So we should stop thinking of Parliament's role as ratification. Parliament's role is an approval role, which we must see as a necessary, as you lawyers would say, as a condition precedent to actually even sometimes going ahead to finish the deal. Just you can send Parliament the term sheets and say, these are the key provisions of the deal. This is the draft. What do you say about it? But when you already conclude a deal, essentially, and then you use certificate of urgency or emergency, whatever they do in Parliament, to basically just essentially just mobilize all the majority votes to vote for a deal, that's an abuse of the process. You're making mockery of the process. So the power class is essentially making mockery of the process that the framers of our Constitution wisely thought they had put in place to mitigate these kinds of risks. It's not working. We need to step back and probably get people like SKB Asante and look at his proposal of this independent review panel that goes through every one of these international agreements and contracts, and also do some value for money analysis. These are not, we almost behave sometimes as if we are alone in this kind of world. These deals are fairly commonplace. We can do price comparisons across country. We can check how deals like that are working elsewhere. But somehow, everything here is almost like, a brand new deal. It's like we are so insular, we don't even care to look at how this same kind of transaction
and that has gotten people
was executed.
That has gotten people very worried about what some label as the unnecessary third parties, intermediaries or consultants or agents.
But that is the structure of these deals, right? When you look at it, when you look at Airbus, this is standard operating procedure. This is the modus operandus. That's how these international bribery deals occur.
So people ask the question, Prof. People ask the question, Prof, and I want you to tell us if they are justified. That I employ you in the civil service, say in the power ministry, you have all these host of experts within the ministry, and yet if you need to buy one small power-related item, you will ignore all these persons and expertise and go look for a third party to lead the process. Like we're in COVID-19 pandemic fight. We need to buy PPEs. You know that the Ministry of Health could simply check the prices and get a procurement process to buy. And yet, we will look for a third party who has some expertise in the areas, and often they don't, like in the Airbus matter, to lead the process. Are people justified in these concerns?
I think this is essentially a rhetorical question. I think you know the answer to the question. You have to ask yourself, why do we do things this way, right? Why must we structure these kinds of transactions this way? Why must we, for example, if we know we have a particular need, we know the kinds of contracts that we tend to enter into. I am a bit surprised that to date, we do not have like model agreements. A lot of the time, people who come here to contract bring the drafts of the contracts that they want to sign with us. They are the ones who bring the drafts, and we react to their drafts. And any lawyer, any transactional lawyer who has been in this business will tell you that whoever's draft you use, right, basically has a leg up, has an advantage over you. So we know, for example, that we are going to enter into power purchase agreements. We know we are going to enter. Why don't we, as a country, we have an Attorney General's department. Why haven't we our own model agreements that basically tell us the terms there? We ourselves have put them in there. So we know for every deal we have, this is what every one of those deals that we do, this is what we are looking to get as a country. We can vary it based on negotiation with the third party, the contracting party on the other side, but basically we have a frame or a structure of the agreement that we want. And then when you come to us with your proposal, we fit it into our model agreement. We do that. I think GMPC, I don't know if they still do that, but GMPC usually has some model agreements like that. We must have these almost across the board. In all the areas where we do repeat business, we as a country, led by our law firm, the Attorney General's Department, must craft agreements, model agreements, which represent the country's preferred position. on these transactions. And of course, we should be willing to vary them based on negotiation with the other contracting parties. But we must go into these things with our own drafts, not responding to drafts brought by people, and then they have deal structures we may not even understand, and we won't consult. We won't consult experts. You know, experts have become a funny word here these days. But I think we have set ourselves up to fail, and to fail intentionally, because there is private profit to be made at the public expense. You know, all of the milestone points are high-risk corruption points in the point of signature, the point of parliament approval, the point of the waivers. All of these we know. We know these are open secrets in this country. We wait a scandal like this to come, then when we act as if we are surprised, but we know.
Like Professor Kwekwasari suggests, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission appears to be handing us some leads, at least, even though it does look more than mere leads. The question is, the state is able, on the basis of that evidence, perhaps also using the legal regime of the mutual legal assistance to procure the hardcore evidence, and on the basis of that, do its investigations and prosecute the various state officers, the government officials and other persons who have not been named here, to do a prosecution. Are you surprised that, unlike this case, unlike the Airbus situation, where within hours of the story breaking, the president, you know, gave an order, a charge to the special prosecutor to proceed and investigate the matter, and in this one, nothing is heard?
Well, I mean, basically, when you look at, and what I'm surprised by is the fact that here we are, claim to be a country that is interested in fighting corruption and illicit flows of money to from the south to the north. We make a lot of these noises about, you know, exploitation of poor countries by, you know, advanced nation business persons and all of that. And you have international, foreign investigative bodies who are using their own resources, right, to investigate these transactions that cost you money. It didn't really cost them money, right? I mean, it didn't really, this transaction did not cost the US a single dime. If anything, it may have gone to enrich Goldman Sachs and some other players. So these are international bodies who are enforcing their own laws, essentially to your benefit. So I see the work they are doing as almost a subsidy. They are giving us almost like a subsidy. The SEC and the DOJ in the Airbus cases are essentially subsidizing our own very weak, local investigative resources. So once we get, they provide us with evidence of this sort, because that's all we usually say. Where is the evidence? When you make an allegation, they tell you where it is. These guys have gathered substantial evidence, substantial pieces of evidence. All we have to do is connect the dots. We say, thank you for doing our work for us. We couldn't have done this. We really probably were not interested in doing this. But now that you've given it to us, the least we could do is follow through and get our own investigative and prosecutorial authorities then to basically do the, you know, connect the dots, do the little internal bit we have to do, and follow through. Even that we are not willing to do. Whether or not the president authorizes, the president basically, given the nature of the independent prosecutor's office, the whole idea was that they would not act on the instruction of the president. I don't think you need even the president to tell the Office of Special Prosecutor that this is another case for you, right? This case follows along the same lines as the Airbus deal. Intermediary, government exposed person, government official, same kinds of structure, right? So obviously the precedent has been set.
Okay.
The OAS ought to take notice of this, and it's obvious that this falls within its remit. If the first one does, this one does too. So for me, it's not really a matter of you know, and I personally would not like a situation where the OSP's prosecutorial or investigative powers are triggered upon the say-so of the president. That was not the idea, right? So I would rather that did not even happen, that it would not take the president to say, Mr. OSP, investigate this. The OSP should know that this matter has come up, the evidence has been gathered, preliminary evidence has been gathered by a credible foreign body. The information is out there in the public domain. What are you waiting for? Just take it and basically work on it.
All right.
You know, I think that we should get to a point where it does not take a precedent. I think the whole idea of the OSP would not even have come about if we respected the traditions of the AG's office historically.
Exactly.
The AG's office historically is not actually supposed to act. It's not actually the ruling party's lawyer. They are not supposed to investigate on pressure from presidents or from other political actors. They are the one member of the cabinet who actually have a separate constitutional authority that mandates them to do their work independently of control from political actors. They can be fired if you don't like what they're doing, then you take the political hit for firing them, but they are independent in the prosecution that they are doing. So if we the traditions of this office historically, from the common law tradition, from Anglo-American tradition, we would not have needed even the OSP. And now that we have created the OSP, we shouldn't make it into another AG where they have to act because the president says
and very interesting views there. Except that in this country you don't have a history or precedent of attorney generals acting in ways that lead the appointers, those who appoint them, to disappoint them. Very interesting situation, and the American situation you gave. Well, so I will return to Prof on your final point to ask the question whether what you make of claims that are being made that by the political, divide, that this case is one that is being pursued in the court. It's not over. It is not like the Airbus one, which is already done, and we are reading judgment. So they are not on the same scale, and you cannot expect the government to act with the same level of swiftness. Even though the experts will say that even with the judgment, it is not the judgment that you are going to implement. You are going to do your own investigation. So I'll come to you on that. Now, Bright, I was asking the question earlier, what do you make of what Professor Kokwasare suggests, that we should cancel, we should take the tax waiver away, cancel, what did he say specifically? Let me get back to that point. I'll get to it. But I was asking, why should Ghana be pursuing this matter, and what lessons to guide us going forward? We have just a few minutes to conclude on this.
I think 4 quick points. One is that it's quite clear now that public officials, when you leave them too much discretion, they're unable to restrain themselves. So we need to find ways to limit that discretion. One way you could do that is to apply time bars for regulatory activities. So if I have a license application and you outline a number of steps that I need to take, and there are reviews, obviously, on the side of the public sector, you need to institute time bars and say, look, if it does not act, if within 2 weeks, a particular action has not been taken, then we can consider the condition waived and things like that. I think that kind of strict time barring might be very useful, given that a lot of the time people are paying to fast track things. They should be fast tracking. The system should be efficient enough. The second one is, in emergency situations such as we are in now, we understand that you need to relax on rules of procurement. But the way that you should then counterbalance the risk is to increase the amount of information disclosure. So you say, okay, we'll relax on rules, but we're going to put out even more information out in the public domain, so that when the emergency is over, people are much better.
Professor Sari says that we should cancel the $27 million tax waiver that was granted and revoke the registration of documents.
2 points on that in that respect. Like I said, it's a civil case now. Typically, the Department of Justice itself has the right to institute criminal proceedings parallel. That has not happened in this case yet. we have the right at this point in time, because it increases the leverage that the civil authorities in the US have.
Right.
If we were to to implement our own criminal investigation, and they'll be much more willing to cooperate because it helps their case.
Right.
Last point, AKSA is registered in this country, and AKSA is making money in this country. It had a contract that was supposed to expire this year. From reading their own annual reports and the like, it appears as if that agreement has been extended. It's been extended in the same period that we are arguing that take-or-pay contracts, which have no strategic value in this country, need not continue. AKSA's situation currently is untenable. The only strategic advantage that I saw in reviewing the documents is that they were providing HFO, or rather they were using HFO, which is part of, or rather is supportive of our fuel diversification strategy, which is we shouldn't have all the power plants either using LCO or gas, or we should have more diversity so that if there is a supply chain shock, we can still continue to run our power plants. That HFO advantage has been overtaken by events because car power is dual fuel. They can use both HFO and gas.
Right.
Secondly, it's already operating at less than 30% capacity and charging us for full capacity because of these take and pay arrangements. What is the basis for continuing to maintain the AKSA agreement? We need a clear explanation from government. Okay. And why are the agreements being extended?
Right. Andrew Ejapa Mesa, you know him, is a member of parliament and a communications member of the governing party. He says there's one thing we must pay attention to, that when these tax waivers are brought to Parliament, they are brought on the basis of a contract that has already, been agreed upon. So to use the word by Professor Kokwasari, that tax waivers recently granted may not paint the accurate picture of things, because you have already committed the state to doing certain things, and the state goes ahead to do them. Let me take Professor H.K.C. Prempeh's final words here, and I was asking whether or not there is any legal sense in suggesting that Airbus was a judgment. This one is not a judgment, and that is why there's no swift, action, if at any at all.
No, I don't. I think the question is correct. I mean, we have. And Bright too, what Bright is suggesting is that we don't have to wait on the U.S. authorities to complete either their civil case or to commence a criminal action, which usually follows. But they do these things, they use all the tools at their disposal normally to get a lot of leverage over the person who, over the defendant, so that if they want to settle, for example, if they want to disgorge the illicit money you have made, a civil suit looks like the ideal way to go, at least at first. And then if you cooperate, maybe they can bargain with you and say, okay, if you cooperate, we'll waive the criminal, we won't go criminal with you later on. So in the US, they use all these tools just to get the most maximum leverage they want to. But I think that if indeed we can show that these contracts were procured corruptly or by fraud or in some way, yes, I mean, it's within our right to actually basically undo the contract. Except that, obviously, in this case, who has clean hands here? I mean, our own representatives as a country who went into this contracting, it's not like basically we were hired by these people, right? It's not like a case where there's a unilateral, fraud against Ghana. We, our own representatives, are complicit in this. And I think this is where things like the law on causing financial loss to the state comes in. If you look at the Cotton case, the Cotton was a case where we didn't even proceed against, the US proceeded against the American citizen who was involved in the US court. And then we went after our own citizens in our own local courts who were complicit in that transaction. After that case and that judgment by the late Justice Afre, it looks like the political class has gotten a bit of cold feet about that law. I haven't seen it very much spoken about, but this is the kind of law that's supposed to protect the public fisc. It's supposed to protect our treasury from kinds of deals where persons who are agents, who are supposed to represent our interests in these kinds of transactions, basically either look the other way or become complicit with third parties to dupe us. And that's where I think, so we ourselves are complicit somewhat in this.
In a minute, what will be your view on a suggestion by some member of parliament that they are interested and they may be interested in a bipartisan, process to investigate this?
Nothing. I mean, if Parliament has the power to do this. Nobody basically, maybe they've never activated that power, but Parliament has power to actually take on a matter like this. It doesn't matter that they are indicted in this. Well, I don't know the particular individual players in this, but Parliament definitely, it is within Parliament's remit to actually call hearings into this matter. Parliament has put itself in all kinds of binds that it shouldn't be bound by. But if Parliament wants to do a hearing on this, it is absolutely within its rights to do it. Whether or not it's going to do it, and whether or not, in fact, the process in Parliament would even allow this to happen, right? Whether or not somebody is not going to play a gatekeeper role to stop all of this from happening, it's another matter.
But, your major interest is to have an institution like the OSP get into this and deal with it exhaustively.
At least after the fact, yes. But I think that basically going forward, we need to look at the structure of these deals and how we attend to them and how we conclude them and find some process. Right. Some process that basically is independent of the political actors. Okay. That some at least technical advice. Look at contracts, look at the whole transaction, and then grateful. Say this is a good one for us. That's I'm very grateful, Professor H.K.C. Prempeh. And Bright, what you are writing in a minute, render it and let's break here.
No, I think that the point that Prof made earlier on about the reputation of Ghana, we need to look at it. This is the second big Goldman Sachs related scandal. You remember the Elias Prekomata, where someone helped the Nigerian governor, Ghanaian, at Goldman, helped the Nigerian governor to launder millions of pounds. And then when he was asked investigations, he later said he brought out money for politics in Ghana. So we really have to start watching this before all of us start getting blacklisted.
And I need to state that the individual involved here who has resigned issued a statement immediately the matter came up, even issued a statement before he resigned. And he said, among other things, confirming some of the details in the court documents, including that he had resigned, but said that he did work and his commission came to 2 million. That is all he's aware of that he took, and that he never paid any bribes or is unaware of any bribes that were paid to anybody or any MPs or any government officials for that matter. We will take a break here. We are very grateful to Professor H.K.C. Prempeh and Bright Simmons. Bright Simmons will take leave of us. Professor H.K.C. Prempeh will continue to stay with us as we ask questions about the lockdown lifted and the fight against coronavirus pandemic. We'll be right back.